Hope everyone had a wonderful Pesach. As we charge ahead, counting the Omer, we're linking the past holiday of Pesach to the upcoming holiday of Shavuot. We're counting day by day, 7 weeks, 49 days. And there's a big message in there and to link the two holidays, the two festivals together. And hence the name of this class is Approaching Sinai. And I'm feeling a little guilty right now because it's thunderstorming here and lightning, and I'm a little concerned that maybe my topic is bringing on the weather reminiscent of the Jewish people approaching Sinai all those years ago to receive the revelation at Sinai, where there was thunder and lightning and great fireworks going on. We have that going on here, but we'll focus on the class instead. And I really wanted to get into studying the book of Ruth, Megillat Ruth, which is a short volume of Megillah in the Torah of 4 chapters, and it's recited on Shavuot. It's the Megillah, just like we have the Megillat Esther, the scroll of Esther on Purim, we have the Megillah of Ruth on Shavuot. We'll talk about some of the reasons for that, but the arc that we want to pursue here is the linkage as we go from the redemption of Egypt, the Exodus, and the holiday of Pesach, and we count day by day, and then we get into the moment of great, gravitas, life-changing, unique event where God reveals God's presence directly by speaking to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai and presenting the world and us in particular with the 10 Commandments. And that's really a tipping point in all of world history. It really is. It's the ultimate fulfillment of God's love for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and the families that they built. And it's the climax of the Exodus itself. And that's what we're going to look at today. And I just want to, just for a moment, because we're going to do this in light of the issue of emunah, belief in God, trust in God, connection to God. So what philosophically is called foundational experiences. So when you think about that, the foundational experience of Exodus is God swooping in, as it says, on angels' wings, and removing the Jewish people from what was a terrible, terrible situation of servitude and oppression and a loss of dignity and a loss of place in the world. And through the revelation of the 10 plagues and the miracles that happen at the sea, God swoops in, elevates the Jewish people, and takes us out of Egypt. This experience has a name to it, and it's called by one of the contemporary thinkers, by Reb Hutner, who was the Rosh Yeshiva in New York, Chesed Vitur. In other words, God, in a certain sense, rescued us out of love for the Jewish people without merit, largely without merit. As we said in the Haggadah itself, we were naked, we were bereft, we were wallowing in a situation where we had to such a great extent lost our luster and our place in the world, and God swooped in like an eagle flying in on its prey and to rescue us and to take us out. And here, so as soon as we complete that, the next day of leaving Egypt, we start counting these 7 weeks and 7 days, and they link us to the day of Shavuot, of standing in Mount Sinai, which you have to understand is a tremendous contrast, because God at Sinai becomes the mitzaveh. He's giving us commandments, presenting us with requirements. So do you see how these two experiences need to be bridged appropriately? Is it God changing course with the Jewish people, like I love you, I love you, I love you, and now you need a change, or I'm going to abandon you, God forbid? But there certainly is a shifting of gears. And that's what I want to talk about, the idea of approaching Sinai, navigating the shift in experience from being redeemed from Egypt, little fireworks in the background here, and to standing at Mount Sinai with the thunder and lightning and with God, identifying God as, I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt, and you are not to have other gods before me. You are to, amongst other things, observe the Sabbath, not commit murder, not commit adultery, moderate your human nature of being jealous and desirous of what other people have. So it goes from a certain sense of an embrace to now a matured relationship involving expectations. And in that regard, the Ramban Nachmanides says that this counting of the Omer is literally like in between days. It's as if it's one holiday. Like Sukkot, we have the first days, and we have the Chol HaMoed, the in-between days, and then we have another holiday called Shmini Atzeret. Here, the Ramban says, in a certain sense, we have 8 days of Pesach, God embracing us, rescuing us, elevating us, taking us out of the moral quagmire of Egypt, and then God bringing us to Mount Sinai, and God commanding us in mitzvot, in commandments, not in good deeds and not in lofty aspirations, but in placing demands upon us as his people. And that's the passageway which we want to navigate. And it's not as easy to navigate as you might think. But connecting these two events, Exodus and Revelation at Sinai, we have number one, the counting of the Omer. And number two, I just want to remind everyone, when Moses stood at the burning bush and God was imploring Moshe, come in, be the leader, rescue, be the human leader that facilitates the rescue of the Jewish people, and Moshe demurs, and God says clearly, "B'hotziacha et ha'am miMitzrayim." It's Exodus 3:12. It's on page 304 in the Stone Chumash. When you take the people out of Mitzrayim, ta'avdun et Elokim al hahar hazeh. They will then serve, worship, be beholden to God Almighty, God Elokim, who places judgments upon the world on this very place, because Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, and the place of the burning bush are one place, one mountain. And therefore it's very clear that this is the end point of the Exodus. And there are different ways of connecting it. Rabbi Breitowitz in Yerushalayim has a very nice presentation explaining that freedom has to have purpose. And freedom without purpose is destructive. So hence, freedom is Exodus, purpose is Sinai, that type of a thing. This is a bridge we have to cross. But I want to say something on a cautionary way, that when it comes to our own development of faith, trust in God, the way we think of God, this transition is not an easy, simple transition. It's not an easy bridge to cross. And I want to cite two very, very real world experiences that people shared with me. And it's been shared with me in different forms many times. But one particular, I had a very good friend who was from a very religious home, a very observant home. And both of his parents were Holocaust survivors. And he told me, my mother believes in nothing, which was a shocking thing. She was an observant woman. She ran a kosher home. She oversaw the raising of their children. They said, my mother believes in nothing. Why? Because when she was 11 years old and she found herself in the camp, and I guess it was Auschwitz, I'm not sure, she, as a little girl, said, I know the story of the Exodus. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to recite the Psalms that they taught me as a little girl in school. And then the walls of the camp are going to fall down. The bad people are going to drown. They're going to disappear. And my mother and me and our family and our fellow Jews were going to walk out of here, and all was going to be well, because that was her foundational attachment to God and to Judaism through the Exodus. And after all, we work hard to establish that kind of a connection. We say at the night of the Seder that we aspire to feel as though we ourselves went out of Egypt. So obviously her parents succeeded in sharing that experience with her, but she therefore, because that was her grounding foundational experience and frame of reference, she throughout her life could never unfortunately accommodate herself to calibrating and finding a connection or a belief in God. A harrowing thing to think about. She's a great woman because she served God with an absence of certainly with an absence of certainty, with an absence of security. But as a woman who wanted to raise a family properly and who had seen her mother and father do that, that's the way she conducted her life. Also, sometimes when people suffer calamity, and here we're not judging anyone, but this idea of suffering, today, Yom HaShoah, so many cross currents of feelings in terms of people sorting out how they reconcile their lives, reality, the world around them with their understanding of God. There also, I've had the experience, and I think we've all had that, we all realize that our faith, when it's tested or when we feel put upon, we feel as though there's a tension we might lose it. It might disappear. And of course, we want to be big philosophers. We start speculating, how could God be good and how could this have happened? And we have questions, and these questions are certainly well explored within the tradition of Torah. However, they need to be explored by each and every person on their own terms, within their own reality, for them to be meaningful. And this is what I want to, this should be our mindset as we think of getting up from the Pesach Seder, Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem, and then face the reality that we stood at Mount Sinai, and we did merit to build a temple in Jerusalem, but it was destroyed, and we merited to rebuild it, and it was destroyed, and a Holocaust did take place. Certainly, we're more aware now than ever before that the world doesn't love us particularly, and that there's immense bias toward us. So all these are part of this journey from getting up from the Seder table and arriving at Mount Sinai and telling ourselves as individuals, finding the strength within ourselves to tell ourselves, yes, God spoke to me and to my people. Yes, God is ultimately good. Yes, God did redeem the Jewish people from Egypt. And yes, God will ultimately redeem the Jewish people at the end of time. Those are cardinal bookends, a framework within which we need to find within ourselves clarity, strength, conviction, so that we can go from Pesach to Shavuot, and we can, in a certain term, make a transition from this chesed vitor, this magnanimous bestowal of kindness, which Pesach represents, and what Rav Hutner calls, and maybe other people call it this too, chesed mishpat. Again, a beneficent, embracing relationship with God, but which has judgment and consequences woven into it. And that's what we're going to try to address tonight in a meaningful way by looking at the book of Ruth. And this will be a first look, and I believe that we probably will stay with the book of Ruth for the coming couple of sessions, maybe not exactly on this point. But I've always felt very inspired. There's a contemporary book written about the book of Ruth by a Rabbi Lipowitz, not well known. He passed away in 1962. This book was his legacy to the Jewish people. He was a man who lived in Tel Aviv for the bulk of his life, was a preacher, spoke, wrote very little, and he, in a magnificent way, addresses these issues in relationship to the book of Ruth. And that takes us to the current setting also, because this idea that we need to rethink as circumstances change. We know full well that people who have gone through travail oftentimes never find their standing of belief. I think one of the most amazing literary journeys that anybody could ever see was Elie Wiesel, as he reconciled his life to his experiences in the Holocaust, and he wrote about it and he shared it, and he arrived at a place seemingly of comfort with God, and he wrote big articles in the New York Times and books and explored ideas and went through periods of cynicism and loss, and sort of came out okay on the other side. As we approach a time where anti-Semitism has clearly resurfaced and has become a challenge to us, and because we're concerned about the whole Jewish people, all of our fellow Jews, making this walk through this reality with their faith intact, helping one another, strengthening one another. So it gives us pause to reflect for a moment. In my lifetime, I was scornful about the idea of anti-Semitism being endemic to the world. I've said many times that my dear beloved friend Rabbi Hollander would tell kids in the Hebrew Day School in San Diego stories about all kinds of schemes going on, the church inflicting pain on the Jewish people, and how God would rescue people. And I used to listen to these stories and say, this is a past. And of course, the importance of what he articulated to our kids is so clear now. But if we reflect for a moment, we have to admit to ourselves that we haven't done so well in preserving our attachment to Judaism and our attachment to our fellow Jews under these idyllic times, this past 80 years or so since the Holocaust. We haven't succeeded so well. And now we see things are being shaken up. And in that shakeup, we do find people running for the exits even faster when it comes to identification as Jews. And we find the opposite as well. We find people finding within themselves a newfound conviction that my Judaism is important, and they're almost finding that because they see the animus and the bias and the persistence of the world seeing us, the Jew, as the other and as something else. So just to pause for a moment before we jump into the book of Ruth, we want to sort things out as we need to now, so we can strengthen one another, so that we can make sure the welcome mat is still out to Jewish people who find these troubling times inspiring, and that we can also put an arm around our fellow Jews who find these times to be troubling and creating uncertainty. So let's look at the book of Ruth. It's read on Shavuot for many reasons, one of which is it talks about the lineage of King David. King David was the father of Mashiach. On its surface, it's a beautiful, simple story. 4 quick chapters. You can describe it like a fairy tale. And the details from a rabbinic perspective is that a princess from a foreign land became attached to a simple Jewish woman, a broken Jewish woman who had gone through tremendous suffering, and attached herself. That's Ruth attaching herself to Naomi, traveled back to the Jewish people, was welcomed by no one, was marginalized in the society, was scrounging around with the beggars of the society, and lo and behold, Prince Charming Boaz appears on the scene and marries her, and she becomes the mother of royalty, and she takes on a special place within Jewish history. And that's one way of reading the story, and it's not an inaccurate way of reading the story at all. But I want to point something out, and the source for this, what woke me up to it, was reading an account of Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz, who was the mashkiach. He was the student supervisor in Rosh Yeshiva in the Mir Yeshiva in Jerusalem. And all students noticed that, Shavuot is a special night, stay up all night learning, very intense learning in a place like the Mir in Jerusalem. Before the crack of dawn, you say the morning prayers, you read the book of Ruth, and you come back triumphant, having received once again the revelation at Sinai. When they would read the book of Ruth, people saw Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, who was a very emotionally attuned person, crying, sobbing throughout the first chapter, the second chapter, troubled, in anguish. And then they saw a transition into the third chapter, the fourth chapter. By the end, he was beaming and joyous. And students have a right to ask, Rebbe, are you okay? What exactly is going on? I mean, first of all, it's not the first time you're reading the book. Second of all, and he said right away, he said, look at the travail that a person like Ruth had to go through in order to enter the Jewish people. Look how difficult it was. She marries a Jewish guy outside of the land of Israel. He dies. Her wealthy in-laws become impoverished. Her mother-in-law chooses to return back to the Jewish people in a broken state. When she comes back, people don't even recognize her. And they literally say, your name is Naomi and Pleasant? Are you kidding me? Your name should be Bitterness. And yet this woman attaches herself to it. She's living in abject poverty. She's gleaning in the fields, and she was a princess beforehand. She was a distinguished scion of the Moabite people. And yet this had to persist for a long period of time. Why did God, so to speak, make it so difficult and challenging for this to take place? Why couldn't the story have been more pleasant? Why couldn't the fairy tale have read with a softer beginning? And of course, Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, being the position he had of being so involved with the young students in the Mir Yeshiva, he saw their struggles to prove themselves as able to learn and master Torah, their struggles to concentrate, their struggles to develop faith, their struggles to earn their place amongst at times the elite leaders of the Jewish people. But he understood how difficult it was. Nothing was made easy. Nothing was handed on a silver platter. And again, to use our paradigm here, it didn't resemble going out of Egypt and being swooped up by an eagle and carried on eagle's wings to a promised land, but rather it resembled toil and difficulty and challenge and uncertainty and doubt about oneself, doubt about the whole future of the Jewish people, and doubt about my own place in it, and a sense of why is it so difficult? And he would experience all that in the course of just a few minutes of reading the Megillat Ruth on Shavuos morning, and he would experience it as if it was happening in vivid color. And of course, what he could fall back on contextually is a statement in the Talmud in Brachot 5a. It says, Gimel Niknin B'Yisurin. The Talmud lays down a principle, and it says there are three things that a person can only acquire through suffering, through travail, and through difficulty. And they are, one, Torah. A person can't make the Torah their own and internalize it and in a certain sense fulfill it in a complete sense without it causing great difficulty, and on every kind of level. And on a simple level, everyone has their couple of mitzvot that really bother them. Everyone has their couple of mitzvot that they love fulfilling, and God is mishpat. God is saying it's a package. I gave you 10 commandments. It's not. None of them are optional. None of them are extra credit. So that's one. The second is Eretz Yisrael, which we're seeing in vivid color now. If we want to acquire a foothold in our ancestral homeland, we pay with blood, with sweat, with tears. And the other is Olam Haba, that a person doesn't simply earn eternal reward in the world to come without paying a price, without mustering courage, without facing challenge. So this is the stage, this is the framework that was in the mind of Rav Chaim Shmulevitz as he completed this journey over this bridge from Pesach till Shavuos, sitting in the yeshiva, waiting for the cheesecake to be put out after the davening, where everybody could say, wow, here it is, 3,300 and whatever years it is, and we're still going strong. But that was the transition. Rabbi Lipowitz points out very brilliantly and very precisely by quoting statements of the rabbis that say that they compare the book of Ruth to the book of Job of Eov. This is a wild idea. Now, what's the comparison? So again, on a very superficial level, Eov had it good. God took everything away from him. He argued with God, pleaded with God. He tried hard to reconcile and rationalize and remain loyal to God Almighty. And in the end, all of his travail went away. Very superficial. Believe me, don't take this to the bank. The book of Ruth, perhaps similar. Ruth's a Moabite princess. She's got it all. Marries a Jewish guy in the field of Moab. Becomes completely attached to the God of Naomi and to the land of Naomi and to the future promise of relationship with God that Naomi offers her. And she slogs it through. And the outcome is King David. Wow. Okay. So now we see a parallel. But the rabbis also point out something which Rabbi Lipowitz articulates in a fantastic way. He says, we enjoy reading the book of Ruth, and we include it in the holiday of Shavuot, something we do not do with the book of Job, which is very sparingly referred to in our liturgy and in our regular life. It's certainly a book of the Torah that merits study. But we don't embrace that book, and here's what Rabbi Lipowitz says. It's akin to the following thing. It's akin to you and I are standing outside. It's a beautiful, nice day, and all of a sudden it gets dark, thunder, lightning, clouds, turmoil, threats of tornadoes, all the things we have going on right now here. And then the sun comes out again. Okay, nice. We're relieved of the angst and the uncertainty. Do we have anything to show for it? No. He says, rabbis explain that the book of Ruth is called Pur'anut, the Is Be'achrit. It's difficulty, travail that has an ending, has meaning, has purpose, and therefore it takes on a completely different character and a different meaning because it has what we'd say in Hebrew, a totza'ah. It has an outcome. And the outcome is that the unique personage of King David, who becomes the everlasting king of Israel then and in the future, and who only his descendants are entitled to be kings of Israel, and only his descendant will usher in the era of Mashiach. So in other words, so he says, what's it like? He says, it's like you planted a seed, and it gets dark, and there's thunder and lightning, and it rains. But then when the clouds part, You see a plant springing up from the ground. You see an outcome. You see a fulfillment. And you tend to come to a conclusion that, oh, it was worth it. It's a process. And it uses this analogy of a seed, which in Hasidic thought is when you hold seeds in your hand, they look nice. They're encapsulated. Kids in school love planting seeds so they can watch the seed decompose and break down. Then it starts to sprout. But you see, it's a process of it being broken down, of the rain and the water and the earth in a fertile way through travail and through a process of decomposition comes a process of recomposition, and we have food to eat, and we have flowers to enjoy, and we have a beautiful world to inhabit. And that's the distinction ultimately that the rabbis give between the book of Job and the book of Ruth. That analogy encapsulates so much. There's a sentence in Mishlei which I wasn't that familiar with. I spoke recently at the yahrzeit of an old friend of mine, and the pasuk says, wrote it down here, I'm not seeing it right now, but the pasuk basically says that, here it is, Leiv yodat morat nafsho. Only a person's own heart truly knows the bitterness of life that they may have experienced. And therefore, ubesimchato, in his joy, in his triumph, lo yitarev zor, no stranger can participate in. To conclude this segment of our analysis, I would point out the following. This sentence is quoted midrashically in the following way. Yitro, the father-in-law of Moshe, after the Exodus, after the splitting of the sea, comes out and joins the Jewish people, brings Moshe's wife, children, deposits them. And then if you look at the narrative closely, and there are different opinions here, but the general opinion is that he was sent away before the revelation at Sinai. And the Midrash asks, why should they send him away? I mean, he had worshipped all the other idols, and he came to see God, and he was a full-fledged believer. Why couldn't he participate? And the Midrash quotes this sentence and says, he wasn't enslaved in Egypt. He didn't suffer for 210 years. He was not, he therefore is a stranger when it comes to the celebration of making this transition from being the recipient of God's beneficence without expectation. That's the way we'll translate them for right now. To the transition of Sinai of being the beneficiary of God's beneficence with accountability, with expectation. And that's how we are going to continue walking this walk and navigating the present circumstances of our lives and looking within ourselves and thinking about our own experiences in a way that will be reinforcing, in a way that will lead us that every challenge and every difficulty we've ever experienced becomes a moment of strengthening, of clarifying, and of growth and beauty.